Insomnia is a good thing sometimes because you get up and you can do a video about day 2 at PhilCon. So I thought I would talk a little bit about the panels that I attended to today and so on. The biggest difference today probably was that there were a lot more people in hall costumes. There were many more people dressed up. Which is always fun to see, people in costume wandering the halls and so on. So the first panel, 11 o'clock, there was a 10 o'clock panel called The Frustration of Incomplete Series, and I thought, no, I just am totally, there are series that are incomplete that just frustrate me, and I'm not going to go to that panel discussing that one. So the first one was getting the scientists in sci-fi right, or SF right. And I misread the title. I thought it was getting the science right, but it was getting the scientists right. That was too... I didn't find the panel that interesting because there were... Yes, there were scientists in science fiction are often caricatures, but I don't know, just the panel just never clicked with me. The second panel, on the other hand, which was military culture in science fiction, that was a fun panel. I enjoyed that. That was a discussion about what is military, what is culture. It covered some topics that I really didn't realize how many different the United States, we always think that there are 4 armed services, and there are. There is, Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force. But what happens is that there are other uniformed services that fit into that, and it was like discussion of the Coast Guard and discussion of NOAA. And then there's the weird ones under the Attorney General, which are actually uniformed services. And so that one, there were some interesting discussions about that. And then there's the one about the public health, which is under the Surgeon General. And you don't realize that they're actually, they all have weird, different things that are there, but they sort of fit under military things. That's why, the Attorney General, not the Attorney General, the Surgeon General is actually a military rank because they are actually a uniformed service, which it was interesting, but they were talking about the difference of culture and so on. There was a lot going on in that panel, and that I think was, to me, was the highlight of the day 2 or Saturday. So then the next panel that I went to was writing morally ambiguous characters. And this one, it covered some interesting questions, and it's about that. It was an interesting panel, but nothing stands out. It wasn't that some interest, so that great. Then I went for lunch. I went out and had some great barbecue for lunch. Then I came back for a panel, things you should read but don't know about yet, and that one. That one, I don't think it actually happened, because I went there and was that the one that I was trying to found the place and there was nobody there, so I'm not sure. There's I wandered around, went through the dealer's room. Dealer's room is small. It's a nice dealer's room. Looked at some various things there. Didn't buy anything today. The next panel I attended was Women Who Love Heinlein, and that was a very small panel. There were 2 panelists, and there were only 3 of us in the audience, and I was the only guy. And but it was an interesting discussion about Heinlein, because we all came to the conclusion that Heinlein had been. If you haven't read Heinlein, he was one of the authors that really got me into science fiction, and he's been attacked by feminists so much, but he really had some very strong feminine characters, and I really like some of his stuff, and I highly recommend, if you haven't read the book, don't watch the movie of Starship Troopers. Read the book. The book is great. It's an amazing book, and I talked about Glory Road, which is another one, and it's a fun. It was an interesting panel but it was very small, and it was sort of disappointing that a lot of other people don't read Heinlein, and I wish more people did that. Then I watched the panel on sex, gender, identity, and speculation, the role in SF in LBGTQA, and that was the more interesting question was we did get it talking about a little bit about what does it mean for sexual identity, because if you start talking about AI, why do you assign a gender to an artificial intelligence, some things like that, really wasn't the most interesting panel, and I disagreed with many of the views there, of those of you who've watched some of my stuff or been in some of my video games. The next one I came in late to, because I wandered around a bit, was sexual violence in fiction. And that one, I sat in the back of the room and I didn't say anything about it, because if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that in my gaming, I have done some things which people have really attacked me for, because I've had rape is a topic that has occurred in many of my Dungeons and Dragons campaign. And this was, we have to have safe spaces, we don't want to trigger people, and it was just no, it wasn't it just didn't fit well with my view. And if you've, like I said, I've had characters of both genders get raped. I've had characters castrated, various interesting things about that. Let me see here. We're trying to find the panel that I went to. It isn't showing up right there. It was sexual violence in there, and then there we go. It's the title. From gore to 50 Shades of Grey: Misrepresentation of BDSM in Genre Literature. Now, that one was a interesting discussion, because we get talking about a variety of different films and what is in the BDSM community and so on, and the impact on 50 Shades of Grey and gore. And there were some interesting discussions about gore, and if you haven't read any of the gore novels, I started reading one of them and made about halfway through. They're not bad, but they're a little, they're more tongue-in-cheek, I guess, than that. It was discussion about very different lifestyle about people who want to get into dominant submission, bondage and discipline, and interesting introduction to some of the groups that I didn't know existed. Well, I didn't know, I heard about, and it was sort of, if you're really interested in finding out more about the communities and the events that happens in some of this. So that was an interesting intellectual learning there. That was a interesting topic. All in all, I enjoyed the day. It was there were some, I got, okay, some things triggered me. At the same time, it says there was a panel that I was almost ready to go over and scream at, which was the unethical treatment of women in gaming, and I was ready to go, I don't believe that. And this whole thing about, are we in a rape culture or not in the United States, and people who don't know what a real rape culture are don't know anything. I guess it was they were talking about diversity, and I said people don't realize that there are still places where diversity doesn't exist, and it doesn't exist in that. And I brought up in there the discussion of China's one-child policy, which had some interesting impact on the culture, in that it becomes very homogeneous, not heterogeneous, and Japan and things like that. And they go, oh, but you have to have diversity, and I go, yeah, but there are places that doesn't really happen. And I was told I basically don't know what I'm talking about. So, okay, I'm not an expert in those fields, but I guess I wanted to bring up, it's the classic example, the movie 300, where the Spartans bred, basically, it's as if they killed off those who were, that you didn't have any handicapped per se directly, because most of the time, at least in childhood, that they you had to survive. It was very rough, and that people, are that you have to have diversity and things like that. And I appreciate diversity. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate diversity in our culture in the United States, but the statement that it occurs everywhere, I think, is sort of a fallacy, and that you couldn't run into places, particularly in science fiction, where diversity was very minuscule. There was it wasn't a very good book, but I remember reading it. I can't remember the title of it, but it was talking about, if we'd managed to send out and colonize various places, but you didn't have faster than light drive, that depending upon the size of your gene pool, that over time, that dominant genes would suppress the recessive genes out of the gene pool. And there was I remember there's a description, they go to the one planet, and most everyone looks alike, because they've bred over the years that the dominant genes were very dominant, and they all looked exactly the same. They all were the same height, because that was they didn't have that large of a gene pool, and it didn't introduce the diversity in there, and so that can happen. So that genes, Those are things that can happen in science fiction, and you hear people say, "Oh, well, we but that's not there." But anyway, so that was neither here nor there. That was the discussions that were today. So I had a fun day. This is running a little bit long, and the downside to running long is that the hotel internet is, shall we say, a bit flaky. It's not very fast, and uploading videos is somewhat challenging. So I'm going to call this one, because I could talk a little bit more, but it's very difficult to do that. So we'll see. Tomorrow is the last real day of the convention, but this is day 2 of the PhilCon.